flipping through yellowed pages. It's ancient, predates even the dwarves. It speaks of awakening. A shadow flitted through the trees, drawing Eric's gaze away from Eloan. "We're not alone," he murmured, tightening his grip on his sword. Elara looked up from her tomb, eyes reflecting worry in the lantern light. "This rune, it seems to have attracted something." She paused, listening intently. "Or someone. Ah." As Eloan's fingers danced over the runes, their glow pulsed like a heartbeat, mirroring her own racing pulse. Eric's gaze shifted between the woods and Eloan, concern warring with readiness in his eyes. "We should leave this place," he urged, hand outstretched to help her rise. Elara looked up from her tomb, her expression grave. "Leaving won't stop whatever this is. We must understand it first, Ga." Eloan's fingers paused mid-trace as an eerie whisper echoed through the woods. Eric's heart pounded, echoing the rune's pulse. Elara looked up, her face pale. "That voice, it's the awakening." Shadows shifted menacingly around them. Eric's sword sang as it left its sheath, a beacon against the encroaching shadows. Eloan scrambled back from the runes, their pulsating light now an ominous warning. "We need to warn the others," she gasped, fear lending speed to her words. Elara clutched her tomb close, eyes wide but resolve firm. "This is bigger than us, bigger than our little camp here. We must find out what's awakening." Ah. Eloan's breath hitched as she recognized the voice from her childhood nightmares. The awakening was no mere myth. Eric's grip on his sword tightened, knuckles white, as he stepped in front of the women, shielding them from the creeping shadows. "We must reach the sentinel camp," he urged. "They need to know what's coming." Elara clutched her tomb like a lifeline, flipping through pages frantically. "There might be something here. Some way to stop it, if we can just find." As they fled deeper into the woods, Eric's sword cleaved through the encroaching shadows, each strike echoing with determination. Eloan's heart pounded in rhythm with his blade, her eyes darting between the advancing darkness and the flickering light of their lone lantern. "The sentinel camp is near," she gasped, hoping its familiar walls would offer solace. Elara stumbled behind them, tomb clutched to her chest, fingers stained with sweat and fear. "This power, it's unlike anything in my texts," she panted, desperation creeping into her voice. "We need help. I'll." As they burst into the sentinel camp, alarms blared to life, echoing their own panicked breaths. Eric's sword dripped shadows, its edge glinting under the sudden flood of torchlight. Eloan, chest heaving, cried out, "The awakening. It's here." Elara stumbled beside her, tomb clutched like a shield. In the heart of Whispering Woods, Eric and Eloan led their allies through the dense foliage, their breaths misting in the chilled air. The once vibrant forest now felt eerily still, as if nature held its breath. Alara, her eyes scanning ancient texts, suddenly stopped, pointing at a faint trail leading deeper into the woods. "This path. It mirrors the runes," she murmured, unease lacing her voice. Eric's grip tightened on his sword, the blade glinting ominously under the dim light filtering through the canopy. He exchanged a glance with Eloan, who nodded determinedly, her bow at the ready. Together, they followed the path, each step echoing their pounding hearts. The shadows seemed to grow denser around them, whispering secrets only they could hear. As they ventured deeper, Alara's tongue began to glow, its light cutting through the oppressive darkness like a beacon. The air grew colder, heavier with an ancient, malevolent presence. Eric paused, listening intently, where being followed. Eloan turned, arrow-notched, her eyes straining in the gloom. She whispered, movement. Eric's sword sang as it sliced through advancing shadows, their tendrils recoiling at its touch. Eloan loosed arrows into the darkness, each one finding its mark, pinning back the encroaching gloom. Alara chanted under her breath, her tongue's light pulsating with each incantation, holding the awakening at bay. Ah! Eric's blade flickered like lightning as he parried the shadow's relentless assault. Eloan's arrows whistled through the air, striking down ethereal foes with unerring accuracy. Alara's voice soared above the cacophony, her spell weaving a shield of light around their party. As Eric's blade clashed against an unseen foe, its edge glowing with runic energy, Eloan's arrows found their marks, pinning back the encroaching shadows. Alara's voice rose in pitch, her spell's light pulsating in time with their heartbeats, revealing glimpses of twisted, skeletal forms within the gloom. As Eric's blade met the shadow's resistance, he grunted, "These aren't mere echoes." Eloan, her quiver nearly empty, asked breathlessly, "How many more arrows do we have left?" Alara, straining to maintain their barrier, called out, "We need to find its source." Eric nodded, sheathing his sword. "This way, it's weaker." They pressed on, hope dwindling. As they followed Eric's lead, the shadows thinned, revealing a desolate glade at the heart of Whispering Woods. In its center stood a monolith, its surface etched with pulsating runes matching Alara's tome. The air hummed with ancient power. Eric approached cautiously. "This is it. This is where we end it." Eloan knocked her last arrow, resolve firm in her eyes. Alara stepped forward, tome open, ready to confront the awakening source. As Eric reached out towards the monolith, Eloan's voice echoed sharply, "Wait." Her eyes darted between the runes and her last arrow, an idea sparking. Alara paused, tome inches from the stone, sensing Eloan's intent. Eric's hand hovered as he turned to her, trusting her instincts. Eric's heart pounded as he reached out to touch the monolith, its runes burning cold against his fingertips. Alara's tongue flickered ominously, warning of catastrophic consequences if they failed. Eloan's arrow trembled at her ear, aiming for the precise rune that would disrupt the awakening. "Steady," she whispered, more to herself than them. Eric's breath misted in the frigid air as he traced the runes with his gaze, seeking the right one. Alara's voice trembled slightly. "Be swift, Eric. The awakening is near." Eloan nodded, her focus unwavering on that critical rune. Eric's eyes locked onto the target rune, his heart echoing its pulsating rhythm. Alara clutched her tongue tightly, fearing the consequences if their plan failed. Eloan's arrow hummed as she released it, trusting in their combined skills to halt the awakening. As Eloan's arrow struck home, the monolith shuddered violently, its runes flickering like dying stars. Eric leapt back, sword drawn, as a deep rumble echoed through whispering woods, shaking the very earth beneath their feet. Alara clutched her tome close, frantically flipping pages, searching for any sign that their desperate plan had worked. Eric's heart pounded in sync with the monolith's dying rhythm, its runes dimming one by one like stars at dawn. Alara's face lit up as she found a passage detailing a possible reversal of the awakening, hope flickering in her eyes. Eloan, bow still drawn, scanned their surroundings for any signs of retreating shadows or incoming threats. As Eric watched the last rune fade, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Alara stepped forward, her voice steady as she read from her tome. "The awakening has ended." Yet, Eloan's eyes narrowed at something moving deeper in the woods. Eric's eyes flicked towards Eloan, following her gaze into the dense thicket where shadows seemed to coalesce once more. "Alara," he called softly, "we need that reversal spell now." Alara nodded, flipping pages furiously as she stepped back from the monolith. As the shadows began to advance, Eric drew his sword again, resolve hardening in his eyes. Alara's voice wavered as she chanted the reversal spell, her tongue glowing brighter with each incantation. Eric and Eloan exchanged worried glances. The shadows seemed undeterred, creeping closer despite Alara's efforts. Suddenly, a massive tree root erupted from the ground, snaking towards them menacingly. Eric's heart pounded as he watched Alara struggle against the relentless shadow tendrils coiling around her. Seizing his chance, he lunged forward, sword cleaving through the darkness, while Aloan's arrows found their mark, driving back the encroaching shadows. As Kalis' massive form landed between them and the monolith, Eric called Alara now. She nodded, her incantation echoing off the ancient stones as she channeled her magic into a blinding beam that struck the heart of the awakening. Ah! As the roots thrashed wildly around them, Eric realized they needed a new plan. Alara, her voice barely audible over the chaos, suggested they seek help from the nearby Earthshapers. Eloan's eyes widened at the mention, remembering tales of their power over earth and stone. Kalis roared defiance, his gaze fixed on the monstrous root writhing towards them. Ah! As the root's thrashing subsided, Eric looked up at Kalis. "One need to reach the Earthshapers' caverns." Alara nodded, her face pale but resolved. "It'll take days on foot." Eric turned to Eloan. "Can you guide us through their hidden paths?" She hesitated before nodding. "I know a way." Eric's heart pounded as he surveyed the clearing, his breath visible in the frigid air. The ethereal glow revealed an ancient stone structure, its runes pulsating with alien energy. Alara approached it cautiously, her tum's light flickering nervously. "These aren't like any runes we've ever seen." Kalis snorted, his hot breath billowing like smoke as he eyed the mysterious edifice warily. Eric's gaze traced the pulsating runes, their alien nature sending shivers down his spine. Alara whispered incantations, attempting to decipher the ancient language as shadows began to dance around them once more. Kalis' growl echoed through the clearing, signaling imminent danger. Alara's fingers danced over the alien runes, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tried to unravel their mystery. Eric's grip tightened on his sword, sensing an ancient power stirring within the stones, while Kalis' growls echoed ominously through the clearing. Suddenly, Alara gasped. "These aren't just awakening us. They're summoning something." Eric's heart echoed the pulsating rhythm of the alien runes as he stepped closer, sword raised, ready to confront whatever was being summoned. Alara's voice trembled with urgency. "Wa must stop this, before it's too late." Kalis snarled, his gaze fixed on the shadows writhing around them like serpents. Eric's resolve hardened as he pressed forward, his blade now a mere extension of his unyielding will. Alara began chanting an ancient spell, her voice weaving through the air like a silken thread, attempting to unravel the summoning's tapestry. Kalis, sensing the growing power, spread his wings wide, ready to shield them from whatever emerged. Eric's blade met the first shadow tendril, slicing through it as if it were smoke. Alara's spell faltered at the sudden manifestation, her eyes wide with surprise. Kalis, taken aback, hesitated before roaring defiantly, his flames licking at the shadows. Eric's blade sang through the air as he battled the shadow tendrils, their number growing with every strike. Alara's voice rose in urgency, her spell now a desperate attempt to halt the summoning's progress. Kalis' flames roared to life, illuminating the clearing and revealing a monstrous form beginning to take shape within the stone structure. Eric's blade clashed against the tendrils, their substance growing solid with each strike, as if the shadows themselves were turning into obsidian. Alara's spell reached its zenith, her voice echoing like thunder, but the runes on the monolith only pulsed brighter in defiance. Kalis' flames roared hotter still, yet the monstrous form within the structure continued to coalesce. As Alara's spell reached its climax, Eric felt an unseen force push him back, his blade faltering mid-swing. The monolith's runes blazed brilliantly, casting eerie shadows that danced chaotically around them before coalescing into a monstrous form within the structure. Kalis' flames illuminated the beast, a towering creature of obsidian, its eyes like twin moons burning with malevolent power. Eric's breath misted in the frigid air as he faced the monstrous obsidian creature, its eyes burning like twin moons. Alara, exhausted from her failed spell, leaned against him for support, her voice barely above a whisper. "We cannot fight this alone." Kalis landed heavily beside them, his wings stirring the shadows that seemed to dance mockingly around their plight. Eric's gaze locked with the obsidian creatures, his heart pounding against an ancient, malevolent will. Alara, her strength waning, clutched Eric's arm, her voice barely audible. "We need another way. Something we haven't tried." Kalis snarled softly, his eyes reflecting the beast's eerie glow. Eric's mind raced as he searched for an alternative solution, his grip tightening on his sword. Alara, leaning against him, whispered, "Perhaps there's a way to communicate, to understand it before we fight." Kalis growled in agreement, his gaze never leaving the obsidian beast. Eric took a deep breath, lowering his sword as he stepped forward, attempting to make contact with the creature's mind. Alara, rallying her strength, began chanting a new spell, one designed to bridge understanding rather than battle. Kalis watched warily, ready to intervene if the beast proved hostile. The obsidian creature's eyes flickered as Eric reached out mentally, its malevolent aura wavering briefly. Alara's spell cast an ethereal glow around them, her voice weaving a tapestry of understanding through the frosty air. Kayla's stance relaxed slightly, sensing a shift in the beast's presence. Eric's mental touch met resistance, but also a flicker of curiosity within the obsidian creature's mind. Alara's spell pulsated with intensity, her voice now echoing like soft thunder, attempting to pierce the beast's malevolent veil. Kayla's eyes narrowed as he sensed an opportunity, his tail lashing in anticipation. Eric's mental probe found an abyss of darkness, yet within it, a tiny ember of consciousness flickered. Alara's spell resonated with this spark, her voice echoing like a distant memory trying to resurface. Kayla's anticipation grew as the creature's malevolent aura seemed to waver under their combined assault. Eric felt a sudden surge of warmth from the creature's mind, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Alara's spell hummed with newfound power, her voice now resonating with ancient knowledge long forgotten. Kayla's anticipation turned to hope as the obsidian beast began to tremble, its form shifting subtly. As Eric's mental touch met curiosity instead of hostility, Alara's spell cast a shimmering bridge between them, her voice echoing like an ancient lullaby. Kayla's hope surged, his tail stilling as the obsidian creature began to transform, its form writhing like shadows on a moonlit night. The obsidian creature's form solidified, revealing a humanoid figure cloaked in shadows, its eyes now twin moons of understanding rather than malevolence. Eric felt a surge of relief as Alara's spell faded, her voice whispering like the wind through ancient leaves. Kayla's hope turned to cautious optimism, his tail slowly swishing as he studied their transformed adversary. Eric stepped closer to the humanoid figure, his voice echoing softly through the clearing as he sought conversation over combat. Alara leaned against Kalis for support, her strength waning after the intense spell work, but her curiosity piqued by this sudden transformation. The figure's eyes softened further at Eric's approach, its form flickering like a candle flame, hinting at a struggle within. Eric's soft voice resonated through the frosty air. "We mean you no harm. Let us understand one another." The figure's form flickered again, shadows receding slightly to reveal hints of bone, white flesh beneath. Alara, intrigued despite her wariness, pushed off from Kalis to stand beside Eric, her eyes searching for answers in the figure's ethereal gaze. As Eric's voice echoed, the humanoid figure's form stilled, its eyes shining steadily like moons in the night. Alara stepped closer, her curiosity overcoming fatigue, squinting at the hints of bone, white flesh now visible beneath receding shadows. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, yet resonating with ancient power. Eric held his breath as Alara's question hung heavy in the air. The humanoid figure leaned forward slightly, its ethereal eyes narrowing as if trying to pierce the veil of time itself. Kayla's tail swished anxiously behind him, sensing the tension like a live wire ready to snap. "Long forgotten," came the figure's response, voice echoing like distant thunder. "I am that which was sealed away, awaken once more." Its form flickered again, shadows receding further to reveal intricate patterns etched into its bone, white flesh, runes mirroring those on the monolith and in Alara's tomb. "Ah!" Eric's heart raced as he absorbed the figure's words, "long forgotten," echoing like distant thunder. Alara, her curiosity piqued despite her wariness, asked, "What is your name?" Kayla's tail stilled, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the figure's response. The figure's form flickered again, shadows receding further as it spoke. "I am Elend, once guardian of this realm before time forgot me." Eric's breath hitched at the name echoing through history, his grip tightening on his sword. Alara's eyes widened in realization, her voice barely a whisper. "The first Earthshaper." "Ah." Elendi's form wavered as she spoke her name, shadows receding further to reveal intricate runes etched into her bone, white flesh. Eric's grip tightened on his sword, recognition dawning in his eyes. "The ancient texts. They spoke of your power," he whispered. Alara's breath caught, her mind racing with possibilities. "Can you help us, Elend? The awakening. It threatens everything." Kayla's tail twitched in anticipation, his gaze locked onto the first Earthshaper. "Ah!" Elenda's form steadied at Alara's plea, her ethereal eyes reflecting the urgency within. "The awakening. It is my duty to protect this realm," she echoed softly, shadows receding fully to reveal a figure of timeless beauty and power. Eric's breath hitched as he beheld the first Earthshaper in all her glory. "Ah!" Elenda's eyes flicked between her allies, assessing their resolve. "To stop the awakening," she began, voice echoing like distant thunder, "we must journey to the heart of Whispering Woods." Eric nodded solemnly, Alara's gaze sharpened with determination, and Kayla's tail lashed in anticipation. Zoo. As Elenda led them deeper into Whispering Woods, Eric marveled at her ethereal grace, his thoughts racing with questions about the first Earthshaper's return. Elara, matching Olanda's pace, sought more information on the heart and its role in halting the awakening. Kalis soared overhead, his eyes scanning for any signs of impending danger. The woods grew denser, the air heavier with ancient magic. As Elenda guided them, Eric noticed her steps echoing rhythmically with the pulse of ancient runes beneath their feet. Elara, entranced by Elenda's knowledge, barely registered the shifting landscape until Kalis' roar alerted them to a looming chasm. "Beware," he cried, but it was too late. They stumbled towards the abyss. Eric's heart pounded as he lunged forward, grabbing Elara's hand just before she plunged into the chasm. Elenda, with preternatural swiftness, seized Eric's other arm, her ethereal strength halting their fall. Kalis' desperate dive ended in a bone-jarring crash against the chasm's edge. Elenda's grip tightened around Eric's arm as she pulled them away from the chasm's edge, her ethereal form flickering with exerted power. "Careful," she warned softly, her voice resonating like distant thunder. "Whispering Wood's heart is treacherous." Elara, now alert and grateful, nodded at their guide while Kalis regained his feet, his wings ruffling as he glared into the abyss. As Elenda steadied them, Eric's gaze followed the chasm's edge, realizing it formed an intricate pattern mirroring ancient runes. Elara's breath caught as she too noticed, whispering, "The awakening, it's already begun here." Kalis' eyes scanned the darkness, sensing unseen forces stirring. Elenda's gaze followed Eric's, her ethereal features hardening as she recognized the rune pattern etched into Whispering Wood's heart. "This awakening, it has taken root deeply," she murmured, shadows flickering ominously around them. Elara, drawing her tome, began to decipher the runes, her brow furrowing in concentration. Kayla's wings ruffled as he sensed ancient magic steering, his eyes scanning for any threat hidden within the dense foliage. As Elend spoke, her form flickered like a candle flame in the wind, hinting at the struggle within her. Eric's grip tightened around Elara's hand, his eyes reflecting determination as he turned to face whatever emerged from the wood's heart. Elara, tongue clutched tightly, whispered an incantation under her breath, her voice resonating with ancient power. Kalis took to the skies once more, his roar echoing through Whispering Woods like a battle cry, scattering shadows that dared approach. Alenda led them deeper into Whispering Woods, her ethereal form guiding them through the dense foliage with unwavering purpose. Eric marveled at her familiarity with these ancient paths, his grip on Alara's hand tightening as they ventured further from safety. Alara, engrossed in deciphering the tome's intricate runes, barely noticed the shifting landscape until Kayla's sudden roar jolted them to a halt. A massive tree lay felled across their path, its ancient trunk pulsating with otherworldly energy. Runic symbols etched into the wood matched those at the chasm's edge, hinting at a deeper connection between the awakening and whispering woods itself. Kayla's wings beat ominously overhead as he surveyed the scene, sensing unseen forces gathering around them. Eric's heart pounded as he studied the pulsating runes on the fallen tree, their rhythm echoing ominously within him. Alara leaned closer, her breath warm against his neck as she whispered incantations under her breath, attempting to decipher their meaning. Kayla's roar echoed overhead, punctuating their tense silence with an urgent warning. As Eric traced a rune, it suddenly flared brighter, casting eerie shadows that seemed to reach for them like grasping tendrils. Alara gasped, stumbling back as the tome slipped from her grasp, its pages fluttering open to reveal a map etched in the same alien script. Kayla's dive bombed, his flames scorching the encroaching darkness. Eric's heart raced as he reached out tentatively, touching another rune on the fallen tree. It hummed beneath his fingers, resonating with ancient power before shattering into dust, revealing a hidden entrance. Alara peered inside, her eyes adjusting to the darkness, while Kalis hovered protectively overhead. "This path leads deeper," she whispered, "but it also feels alive." Ah. Eric's breath misted in the frigid air as he stepped into the hidden entrance, his eyes adjusting to the dim light within. Alara followed close behind, her tome held aloft to cast an ethereal glow, while Kalis' flames illuminated the narrow passage from above. The walls bore more runes, these ones pulsing in synchronization with their heartbeats. Eric's footsteps echoed ominously through the pulsating tunnels as they ventured deeper into Whispering Wood's heart. Alara's tome cast eerie shadows on the runic walls, their alien script now dancing with sinister life under her touch. Kalis' flames illuminated sudden movement, roots writhing like serpents, blocking their path. Eric drew his blade, its steel singing as it met living wood. Eric's blade sang through the air as he battled the writhing roots, their number seemingly endless. Alara, her tome open to a page filled with ancient illustrations, called out potential weak points in the wooden foe. Kalis' flames roared, incinerating some roots, while revealing others glistening wetly in the dim light. Ah! Eric's blade sliced through another writhing root as Alara's voice rose, above the symphony of destruction, her spell weaving together threads of ancient knowledge. Kalis' flames illuminated their path, revealing a cavernous chamber beyond the tunnel. As they stepped inside, the pulsating runes on the walls resonated with newfound power, casting eerie shadows that seemed to welcome them. Eric's blade clashed against an unyielding root as Alara's spell faltered, her breath ragged from exertion. Kalis' flames illuminated the relentless onslaught, revealing no end in sight. Eric's heart pounded, his grip tightening on his sword as desperation set in. As Eric's blade clashed against an immovable root, Alara slumped against him, her spell spent. Kalis' flames cast long shadows dancing ominously across the pulsating walls, revealing no exit in sight. Despair threatened to consume them when suddenly, a soft melody echoed through the chamber, its rhythm mirroring the rune's pulse. As the melody's intensity grew, the unyielding roots began to retreat, revealing a narrow path leading deeper into the wood's core. Alara, her strength renewed by Eric's steadfast support, whispered an incantation that amplified the mysterious tune, guiding their steps. Kalis, his flames flickering in time with the rhythm, soared overhead, his keen eyes scanning for hidden dangers. The pulsating runes on the walls now glowed brighter, casting a mesmerizing light show as they synchronized perfectly with the melody. Eric felt an inexplicable connection to these alien symbols, their dance resonating within him like echoes of ancient memories. Alara's tongue, open to a page she'd never seen before, began to glow softly, its runes mirroring those around them. As Alara's amplified melody reached its crescendo, a colossal door groaned open, revealing an ancient chamber bathed in luminescent fungi. Eric stepped inside, his sword raised, as Kalis flames illuminated intricate carvings depicting celestial bodies and mythical creatures. Alara gasped at the sight of a massive crystal pulsating with otherworldly energy at the chamber's heart. As Eric approached the pulsating crystal, it hummed softly, resonating with the melody still echoing through the chamber. Alara's eyes widened as she recognized the script etched into its surface. It was the same alien language from her tome. Kalis landed beside them, his flames dimming to reveal unease in his draconic features. Eric's fingertips grazed the crystal's surface, sending shivers up his spine as its hum intensified. Alara, entranced by the rune's dance, whispered an incantation, her voice blending seamlessly with the melody. Kalis' unease grew, his flames flickering nervously as the air crackled with ancient power. As Eric's fingers pressed against the crystal, its hum resonated deeply within him, echoing like distant thunder. Alara's incantation reached a crescendo, her voice intertwining with the melody as runes on the tome and crystal began to glow in unison. Kalis' unease intensified, his flames roaring higher, sensing an unseen presence awakening. As Eric's fingers pressed deeper into the crystal, its hum resonated painfully within him, as if awakening an ancient slumbering beast. Alara faltered mid-incantation, her eyes wide with sudden fear, sensing something sinister stirring in response to their intrusion. Kalis' flames surged higher, his roar echoing ominously through the chamber as shadows began to writhe menacingly around them. Ah! Eric's heart pounded as he withdrew his hand from the crystal, its humming echo now replaced by an ominous silence. Alara clutched her tongue close, her gaze darting between Eric and the pulsating runes on the walls, now dark and still. Kayla's flames flickered nervously, casting eerie shadows across their tense faces. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the chamber, growing louder until it shook the very foundations. Dust rained from the ceiling as stalactites shattered, their fragments clattering to the floor like bones. Eric's grip tightened on his sword, Alara's spellbook held at the ready, while Kalis took to the skies, his flames casting a desperate glow against encroaching darkness. As Eric braced himself for battle, Alara flipped through her tome, desperate for any spell that could fend off this new threat. Kalis' flames illuminated the chamber's walls, revealing runic symbols now glowing ominously once more. Ah! As Alara's finger traced an ancient symbol on her tome, a faint glow emanated from its pages, reflecting in Eric's determined eyes. Kalis' flames flickered nervously as the rumbling intensified, casting eerie shadows on their tense faces. As Alara's incantation reached its climax, a blinding light enveloped them, silencing even Kalis' anxious flames. When their vision cleared, they found themselves in an expansive cavern adorned with colossal crystals that hummed softly, pulsating with energy, echoing the alien runes still etched into Eric's mind. Alara approached one crystal tentatively, her tongue held aloft as she attempted to decipher its markings. Eric's gaze darted between Alara and the pulsating crystals, concern etched on his face as he watched her attempt to decipher their alien script. Kalis' flames flickered nervously, illuminating sudden movements within the shadows cast by the luminescent rocks. As Alara's fingers traced a particularly complex rune, the cavern trembled softly, sending shivers down their spines. Eric's heart pounded as Alara's fingers traced another rune, the cavern trembling more violently this time. Kayla's flames surged, casting desperate shadows against encroaching darkness. Alara, Eric urged, "We must leave, this power is unstable." As Alara reached for one last rune, a sudden explosion of energy sent them sprawling. Amidst the rubble, Eric rushed to Lara's side, helping her up as she coughed, dust clinging to her hair and robes. Kalis landed nearby, his flames dimming to reveal concern for their well-being. "We must leave," Eric urged, surveying the damaged cavern. Alara nodded weakly, clutching her tongue protectively. As they made their way back through the trembling tunnels, Eric supported Alara, one arm wrapped around her waist. Kalis flames illuminated their path, revealing more cracks and instability in the once solid rock. The air grew colder and heavier, charged with an unseen energy that prickled their skin ominously. As they emerged from the unstable caverns, Eric guided them towards Whispering Wood's edge, hoping to put distance between themselves and the awakened power. Alara, still weakened by her spellwork, leaned heavily on him, her breaths ragged. Kalis flames cast worried glances at her before focusing on their path ahead. Suddenly, an earth-shattering roar echoed through the woods, causing trees to tremble and birds to take flight in panic. Eric's heart raced as he realized this wasn't some distant storm, it was coming closer. "We need to find shelter," he urged, scanning the forest for any sign of safety. As the roar intensified, Eric spotted a sturdy looking treehouse nestled high above, its wooden walls reinforced with metal bands. "There," he pointed, helping Alara up as Kalis took flight, guiding them towards their potential refuge. The tree shook violently as they ascended, its ancient roots groaning ominously. Inside the treehouse, Eric tended to Alara, who collapsed onto a makeshift bed, her breaths shallow and rapid. Kalis kept watch by the door, his flames casting anxious shadows on the rustic interior. Suddenly, the roar reached a deafening crescendo before silence fell like a shroud. As Eric's heart pounded with worry for Alara, he heard a soft rustling outside their makeshift sanctuary. Kalis flames flickered, illuminating the treehouse interior as they turned towards the sound. "Something's out there," Eric whispered, drawing his sword silently. Eric's grip tightened around his sword as he strained to hear over Alara's ragged breaths. Kalis flames flickered, casting eerie shadows on the door, ready for whatever approached. Suddenly, a gentle knock echoed through the treehouse, startling them all. "Who's there?" Eric called, blade still raised. A soft voice replied, "I mean no harm. I've heard your struggles and wish to aid you." Intrigued, Eric glanced at Alara before unlocking the door. As Eric opened the door, a young woman with ethereal features and eyes like moonstones stepped inside, her hands raised in peaceful greeting. "I am Lua," she introduced herself softly, a guardian of Whispering Woods. Kalis flames flickered curiously as Alara watched from her bed, her interest piqued. "Tell us why you've come, Lua," Eric requested, his sword still at the ready. She glanced at the weapon before speaking. "I felt your struggle against the awakened power within Whispering Woods. I believe we can help each other." Eric's grip eased on his sword as Lua spoke, her voice soothing like a gentle breeze. Alara sat up slightly, intrigued by this new presence. "What kind of help do you offer?" she asked, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. Lua approached Alara, placing a gentle hand on her forehead, her eyes glowing softly as she whispered an ancient lullaby. Eric watched warily, his grip still tight around the sword, but Lua's peaceful demeanor put him at ease. As Lua finished singing, Alara's breaths grew steady and calm, her face regaining some color. As Lua's lullaby echoed through the treehouse, Eric's tension eased, his grip on the sword relaxing. Careless flames danced gently around them, casting a warm glow that seemed to breathe life back into their weary forms. Alara's breaths grew steady and calm, her face regaining its usual vitality. Lua turned to Eric, her moonstone eyes filled with wisdom and kindness. "Your friend will be well rested soon," she reassured him softly. "But we must leave this place before the awakening consumes it entirely." Her gaze flicked towards the pulsating crystals outside, their rhythm growing more urgent. Eric nodded solemnly, sheathed his sword, and helped Lua gather their meager belongings. As they prepared to depart, Kayla's flames surged suddenly, illuminating sudden movement at the treehouse door. Eric drew his blade once more, stepping protectively in front of Alara as Lua turned towards the entrance. "Who's there?" Eric called wearily, his heart pounding with renewed tension. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a figure cloaked in shadows. As they stepped into the light cast by Kayla's flames, their face became visible, an elderly woman with striking blue eyes and silver hair cascading down her back. The elderly woman's blue eyes sparkled with recognition as she looked at Lua. "Child," she said, "I've been waiting for you." Eric frowned, lowering his blade slightly but keeping it at the ready. "Who are you?" he demanded. The woman smiled mysteriously. "I am Aloan, the last guardian of Whispering Woods, ancient wisdom." "Ah." Aloan's presence brought an aura of ancient wisdom into the treehouse, her blue eyes reflecting centuries of knowledge. Eric felt a sense of unease but also curiosity as he regarded this mysterious woman who claimed to have been waiting for Lua. "What do you want with Lua?" he asked, his blade still poised between them. Aloan's gaze softened as she looked at Lua, her expression filled with warmth and respect. "I have much to tell her," she said. "And together, we may be able to stop the awakening that threatens Whispering Woods." She turned towards the pulsating crystals outside, their rhythm now urgent and insistent. Lua approached Aloan, her eyes questioning yet hopeful. "You know of the awakening?" she asked softly. Aloan nodded solemnly. "Indeed, child. And I believe our combined efforts could put an end to it." She reached out a wrinkled hand towards Lua, beckoning her to follow. As Lua considered Aloan's offer, Eric stepped forward, his blade still at the ready. "We cannot simply trust you," he stated, eyeing her warily. Aloan smiled patiently, understanding his caution. "I expected as much, young Blade Warden," she replied. "But I assure you, our goals align. We must halt this awakening before it consumes Whispering Woods." The pulsating crystals outside grew more urgent, their rhythm echoing ominously through the treehouse. Lua turned to Eric, her eyes filled with resolve. "I believe Aloan," she said softly, "and I must follow my heart on this path." Eric hesitated, torn between his duty to protect Lua and the urgency of their situation. As he pondered, Kayla's flames surged suddenly, illuminating a shadowy figure approaching the treehouse. As Lua took Aloan's hand, Eric reluctantly sheathed his sword, trusting Lua's judgment. Together, they stepped out into the pulsating glow of the alien crystals, their urgency now palpable. The once hidden path before them now shimmered with ethereal energy, beckoning them towards an unknown destiny. As Lua and Aloan led Eric deeper along the shimmering path, the pulsating crystals cast eerie shadows that seemed to reach for them like grasping tendrils. Eric's heart pounded with unease, but his trust in Lua kept him moving forward. Suddenly, a deafening roar echoed through Whispering Woods, shaking the very foundations of the earth. The ground trembled violently beneath their feet, and Kalis cried out in alarm from above. As Lua, Aloan, and Eric rushed along the shimmering path, the ground beneath them convulsed violently, throwing them off balance. The once distant roar intensified, now echoing like thunder around them, as Kalis cried out in alarm overhead. Panicked, Eric grabbed Lua's hand, fearing she might be swept away by the sudden upheaval. As Lua, Aloan, and Eric rushed along the shimmering path, the ground beneath them convulsed violently, throwing them off balance. The once distant roar intensified, now echoing like thunder around them, as Kalis cried out in alarm overhead. Panicked, Eric grabbed Lua's hand, fearing she might be swept away by the sudden upheaval. With a deafening crack, a massive chasm opened before them, swallowing the path and revealing a yawning abyss that threatened to consume them all. Eric's heart pounded as he stared into the darkness, realizing their journey had led them not just to the heart of Whispering Woods, but to its very core. As Lua, Aloan, and Eric clung to each other at the chasm's edge, their hearts raced with terror. The ground trembled ominously, threatening to consume them all. Kalis' desperate cries overhead echoed their own plight. With newfound determination, Aloan whispered an ancient incantation, her hands tracing intricate sigils in the air. Eric watched in awe as a soft glow enveloped them, the chasm's darkness recoiling from its touch. As Lua, Aloan, and Eric clung to one another at the chasm's edge, their hearts raced with terror. The ground trembled ominously, threatening to consume them all. Kalis' desperate cries overhead echoed their own plight. With newfound determination, Aloan whispered an ancient incantation, her hands tracing intricate sigils in the air. Eric watched in awe as a soft glow enveloped them, the chasm's darkness recoiling from its touch. As the ethereal light pushed back the encroaching shadows, a precarious path became visible, winding around the precipice and leading deeper into Whispering Wood's heart. With Aloan guiding them, they carefully traversed the narrow trail, their steps echoing ominously as the chasm yawned menacingly below. Suddenly, the ground shook violently once more, sending Eric stumbling towards the abyss. Lua cried out, reaching for him just in time to prevent his fall. Her heart pounded with fear, but also determination. They had come too far to succumb now. As Lua steadied Eric, she felt his racing heart echo her own. Aloan's incantation faltered briefly before she regained composure, her voice guiding them forward. The chasm seemed to breathe malevolently, its darkness reaching out like tendrils. Ahead, a grove emerged from the shadows, ancient trees twisted together, forming an archway that pulsed with energy. Beyond it, whispers echoed, beckoning ominously. Eric's resolve hardened. He would face this unknown alongside his companions, no matter what lay ahead. Lua led them beneath the pulsating archway, its energy prickling their skin. Eric glanced back at the chasm, now a mere sliver through the trees, before they were swallowed by darkness. Aloan's incantation faltered as Lua whispered, "We are not alone." Footsteps echoed around them, unseen watchers drawing near. Unseen hands grabbed Eric's shoulders as spectral voices hissed. "Intruders!" Lua gasped, her eyes searching the darkness for their assailants, while Lowen's spell faltered. Eric shrugged off the unseen grasp, drawing his blade, its steel gleaming in the pulsating light. "Show yourselves," he challenged, voice echoing through the grove. The whispers hushed briefly, before a figure materialized, its form ethereal yet menacing. It wore robes adorned with runes mirroring those on the archway, eyes burning with ancient power. "We are the grove's wardens," it intoned, "guardians of the wood's secrets. Why have you trespassed here?" Kayla's flames flickered nervously as Lua stepped forward, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We seek answers to the awakening plaguing Whispering Woods." The ethereal guardian studied Lua intently before speaking again. "You bear an ancient power, yet you do not understand its true nature." Alara's brow furrowed as she stepped forward, her tongue held out. "We mean no harm. We seek to stop the awakening that threatens all of Whispering Woods." The guardian glanced at her tongue, then back at Lua. "Very well. I shall guide you, but heed my words, some truths are best left undisturbed." Ah. Under the ethereal guardian's guidance, they ventured deeper into the grove, its pulsating energy intensifying with every step. The guardian led them to a massive tree at the heart of Whispering Woods, its trunk carved with ancient runes that mirrored those on Lua's staff and Alara's tongue. Eric's blade hummed softly as he approached, sensing the power emanating from within. The guardian raised an arm, placing a glowing palm against the tree's rough bark. The runes blazed to life, their light casting eerie shadows around them. "This is the heart of Whispering Woods," it intoned, "the source of its ancient power." As the guardian spoke, Lua felt a surge of energy resonate through her staff, her heart pounding in response. Eric's gaze traced the pulsating runes on the heart tree as Lua's staff resonated with its power. Alara, eyes wide, flipped through her tome, searching for any mention of this ancient entity. The guardian watched them silently, its expression inscrutable. Suddenly, the ground trembled violently, the heart tree's runes flickering ominously. Eric steadied himself, sword at the ready as Lua clutched her staff tightly. "What's happening?" Alara asked, concern etched on her face. The guardian's eyes glowed brighter as it spoke. "The awakening grows stronger. We must intervene before it consumes Whispering Woods entirely." Eric's grip tightened on his sword, resolve burning in his gaze. Lua nodded determinedly, her staff pulsating with renewed energy. As the tremors subsided, a chilling wind swept through the grove, extinguishing Kayla's flames briefly. When they reignited, shadows scuttled away from their light, revealing a path leading deeper into the heart tree's roots. Eric glanced at Lua and Alara. "We should follow it." "Ah." Eric took point, his blade held aloft as they ventured into the shadowy depths of the heart tree's roots. The air grew colder, damp with an unseen moisture that clung to their skin. Lua's staff cast eerie shadows on the earthen walls, revealing runes etched into the very foundations of Whispering Woods. Eric's blade sliced through the shadows, revealing more runes etched into the earthen walls, pulsating with an eerie glow. Lua traced them with her staff, her brow furrowed in concentration as she attempted to decipher their meaning. Behind them, Alara consulted her tome, its ancient pages rustling ominously. Eric's blade met resistance as he hacked at the shadowy tendrils, their substance growing denser with every strike. Alara's spell faltered, her eyes wide with realization. This was no mere awakening, but a corruption spreading through Whispering Woods' heart. Lua gasped as she traced the runes. "These aren't ancient. They're changing." Eric's blade grated against the dense shadows, sparks flying as they resisted his every strike. Alara's spell flickered uncertainly, her voice faltering under the weight of this ancient corruption. She now understood all too well. Lua's staff moved feverishly across the changing runes, her eyes wide with urgency. These aren't mere scriptures, they're alive and evolving. Eric's blade finally pierced through the dense shadows, revealing a chasm beneath teeming with writhing tendrils. Alara gasped. This is what's corrupting Whispering Woods. Lua's staff flickered, its light casting eerie patterns on the squirming abyss. Eric's blade hacked at the writhing tendrils, their numbers multiplying ominously as they sought to engulf him. Alara's voice rose in desperation, her spell faltering under the sheer magnitude of corruption. Lua's staff flickered wildly, its runes now pulsing with alarm. "We can't keep fighting this way," she urged. "We need a plan." Eric, panting from exertion, glanced at Lua and Alara huddled near the pulsating chasm. "We need to contain this, not just fight it," he declared. Lua nodded, her mind racing with ancient lore as Alara's spell flickered weakly. "There might be a way." Lua began, tracing a rune on the earthen wall that seemed to respond to her touch. Eric watched as Lua's staff traced intricate patterns on the wall, runes pulsating under her touch. Alara, brow furrowed, flipped through her tome searching for any mention of these evolving scripts. "I've never seen anything like this," she confessed, concern etched deeply. Lua paused, her fingers hovering over a particularly complex rune. It resembles an ancient banishment ritual." Eric's grip tightened on his blade, hope flickering in his eyes. "Can you perform it?" he asked, voice filled with urgency. Lua's staff glowed brighter as she traced the final rune, the air crackling with energy. Alara gasped. "It's working." Her tome opened to a page detailing the ancient banishment ritual. Eric readied his blade, eyes scanning the writhing tendrils warily. Just as Lua completed the rune, the chasm began to throb violently, its tendrils twisting in agony. With a deafening roar, a massive shadowy figure emerged from the depths, its form shifting like liquid darkness. Eric's heart pounded as he faced the towering shadow creature, its form writhing with corruption. Alara and Lua stood their ground, Lua's staff humming with power as she channeled the banishment ritual into it. The air crackled with energy, the very fabric of reality seemed to groan under the strain. As Lua's staff glowed brighter, the shadow creature let out an ear-splitting roar, its form shifting and twisting in agony. Eric readied his blade, bracing for the inevitable counterattack. "Now!" Lua cried, her staff thrust towards the monstrosity, a bolt of pure light streaking from it. The blinding bolt struck the shadow creature, its form convulsing as if made of liquid night. Eric watched, heart pounding, as the beast writhed in agony before Lua's staff, its shape warping and contorting. Alara clutched her tome, eyes wide. "It's fighting the banishment." Eric's grip tightened on his blade as the shadow creature thrashed, its form distorting wildly under Lua's assault. Alara's spell flickered, her voice straining as she poured every ounce of power into Lua's staff. "It's not enough," Lua cried, sweat beading on her brow. Eric's heart raced as he watched Lua's staff falter, its light flickering like a dying flame. Alara's voice cracked under the strain, her spell weakening. "We must combine our strengths," Eric urged, stepping forward with his blade held aloft. Lua nodded, her staff glowing brighter as she channeled their combined power into it. The air sizzled with energy, and the shadow creature roared in defiance, its form writhing wildly. Eric's heart pounded as Lua's staff glowed brighter under his channeled strength, its pulsating light casting dancing shadows on the writhing abyss before them. Alara's voice rose in harmony with Lua's chant, their combined power surging through the ancient ritual. The shadow tendrils thrashed wildly, desperate to evade the banishment spell. Eric's blade sang through the air as he stepped back, allowing Lua and Alara room to work. The staff glowed steadily now, its light pushing back the shadows momentarily. Almost there, Lua panted, sweat beading on her forehead. Alara nodded, her voice stronger as she continued chanting, the runes on her tomb flipping rapidly in response to Lua's staff. The chasm churned, tendrils writhing desperately before subsiding slightly under combined assault. Eric's blade sliced through another, writhing tendril as Alara's voice reached its crescendo, Lua's staff blazing like a miniature sun. Suddenly, the chasm began to shrink, tendrils recoiling from their combined might. Eric's gaze locked onto Lua as she traced the final rune, his heart pounding with anticipation. Alara's voice echoed through the chamber, her tongue held high like a beacon. The chasm churned one last time, before sealing shut, silence descending like a shroud. As the last tendril vanished, Eric sheathed his blade, turning to face Lua and Alara with newfound respect. "That was impressive," he acknowledged, a rare smile tugging at his lips. Lua smiled back weakly, leaning on her staff for support after pouring so much energy into the ritual. As Lua's staff finally extinguished, Eric reached out to steady her, concern etched on his face. "Are you alright?" he asked softly, while Alara closed her tome, relief evident in her eyes. The air grew still once more, the pulsating runes dimming slightly. Eric's heart swelled with pride as he looked at Lua and Alara, their breaths ragged but spirits unbroken. "We make quite the team," he said, extending a hand to Lua, helping her stand tall once more. Behind them, the sealed chasm pulsed ominously, its silence somehow more unsettling than its previous writhing. As Lua's breath returned, she looked at Eric and Alara with newfound respect. "We couldn't have done it without you both," she acknowledged softly. Meanwhile, the pulsating seal behind them seemed to throb in anticipation, as if the creature within was merely biding its time. Eric's gaze shifted from Lua to Alara, his voice grave as he said, "This victory feels temporary." Alara nodded solemnly, her tome clutched tightly once more. "We've sealed it for now," she murmured, "but I fear whatever that was, it won't stay contained indefinitely." As Eric's words echoed ominously through the chamber, Lua's staff flickered uneasily, sensing the truth behind his fears. Alara opened her tome once more, flipping through pages with renewed urgency. "We should reinforce this seal," she suggested, tracing a rune on its pulsating surface. Eric's gaze remained fixed on the pulsating seal as Lua's staff continued to flicker uneasily beside him. Elara, engrossed in her tome, suddenly paused, her eyes widening with realization. "This creature. It feeds off fear and darkness," she whispered. A chill ran down their spines at her words. Eric's grip tightened on his sword as he turned to Lua and Elara. "We need more than just a seal." Lua nodded, staff glowing brighter at her intent. Elara looked up from her tome, determination in her eyes. Eric proposed, "We should reinforce this seal with our combined strengths." Lua agreed, her staff glowing brighter, as she traced runes matching those on the pulsating barrier. Elara nodded, beginning an incantation from her tome, its pages turning by unseen hands. Eric's resolve hardened as he watched Lua reinforce the seal with runes matching those on his blade. Elara's incantation rose in pitch, her voice weaving an intricate spell around them. As their powers combined, the pulsating light of the seal intensified, casting stark shadows across their determined faces. The chamber trembled slightly under the strain of their combined magic, dust falling from the earthen ceiling as Lua pressed her staff against the glowing barrier. Eric's sword hummed softly, its runes resonating with those on Lua and Elara's artifacts, amplifying their efforts. As their combined powers surged through the seal, Eric felt an unseen force pushing back against them. Resistance growing with every pulse of light. Lua's brow furrowed in concentration as she held her staff firm, its runes glowing brighter still. Elara's voice faltered briefly before rising again, determination burning in her eyes. As Lua's staff glowed brighter, Elara's incantation reached its crescendo, their combined energies pushing back against the unseen force threatening to shatter the seal. Eric's blade trembled in his hand as he channeled more power into it, the runes on its surface blindingly bright. Suddenly, with a resounding boom, the chamber fell silent and still, the pulsating light of the seal now steady and constant. Exhausted but triumphant, Eric lowered his blade as Lua leaned on her staff, catching her breath. Elara closed her tome gently, her voice barely above a whisper. "That should hold, for now." The pulsating seal behind them seemed to hum softly in response. As Lua's staff finally dimmed, Eric sheathed his sword, their combined efforts having strengthened the seal significantly. Elara, still catching her breath, suggested, "We should monitor this closely, we don't know how long it will hold." Careless flames flickered nervously behind them as shadows began to retreat from the chamber's edges. As Eric, Lua, and Elara kept vigil, the pulsating seal behind them seemed to grow steadily fainter, its hum softening like a distant echo. Lua's staff flickered anxiously beside her as she watched the eerie display, her heart pounding with worry. "It's losing strength," she whispered, fearing the worst. Eric's gaze remained fixed on the seal, his sword still drawn and ready. "Can we reinforce it again?" he asked, turning to Alara, who was already flipping through her tome, searching for another solution. The ancient pages rustled ominously under her fingers as she scanned their contents. As Alara's fingers danced across her tome, searching for answers, Eric felt an unsettling chill run down his spine. The seal flickered ominously once more, its hum rising like a distant storm. Lua gasped. It's not just losing strength, it's breaking. Shadows crept back into the chamber, as if sensing the impending release of their master. As Eric's heart pounded with dread, he glanced at Lua and Alara, their faces etched with determination despite their growing fear. "We must reinforce it again," he urged, gripping his blade tighter. Lua nodded resolutely, her staff glowing brighter as she traced intricate runes onto the faltering seal. Alara flipped through her tome urgently, searching for a stronger incantation to bolster their defense. As Lua's staff flickered ominously beside her, its runes pulsing with alarm, Eric gripped his blade tightly, fear gnawing at him. "It's not slowing down," he growled, watching the seal's dim light wane. Alara, frantically flipping through her tome, gasped, "I can't find anything to strengthen it." Shadows crept closer, tendrils reaching out like dark fingers. As Lua's staff flickered anxiously beside her, its runes pulsing with alarm, Eric felt an icy dread grip his heart. "It's worsening," he murmured, watching the seal's dim light falter ominously. Alara, frantic in her search for a solution, cried out, "I can't find anything to slow it down." Shadows encroached further, tendrils writhing hungrily towards them. As Lua's staff flickered anxiously beside her, its runes pulsating with alarm, Eric gripped his blade tightly, fear gnawing at him. "It's worsening," he murmured, watching the seal's dim light falter ominously. Alara, frantic in her search for a solution, cried out, "I can't find anything to slow it down." Shadows encroached further, tendrils writhing hungrily towards them. As Lua's staff flickered anxiously beside her, its runes pulsating with alarm, Eric felt an icy dread grip his heart. The seal's dim light wavered ominously, casting eerie shadows across their faces as shadows encroached further, tendrils writhing hungrily towards them. Alara, frantic in her search for a solution, cried out, "I can't find anything to slow it down." Eric's grip tightened on his blade, resolve burning within him despite the growing despair. "Oh." Eric's heart raced as Lua's staff flickered ominously, its runes pulsating with alarm. "It's breaking," he growled, watching the seal wane before them. Alara gasped, "We must reinforce it again," frantically searching her tome for a solution. Shadows crept closer, tendrils writhing hungrily towards the trio. Eric's heart pounded as Lua's staff flickered ominously, its runes pulsating with alarm. "We need more than just reinforcement," he growled, watching the seal wane before them. Alara, desperation etched on her face, clutched her tome tightly, whispering ancient incantations under her breath. Shadows crept closer, tendrils writhing hungrily towards the trio as Lua's staff cast anxious flickers on their determined faces. Eric raised his blade, resolve burning in his eyes. "We must combine our powers," he urged, locking gazes with Lua and Alara. Alara nodded, her voice rising as she chanted, "Together, we can bolster this seal." As Eric's blade touched Lua's staff and Alara's tome, a surge of energy pulsed through them, resonating with the faltering barrier. Eric's heart raced as Lua's staff flickered ominously beside her, its runes pulsating with alarm. "The seal's failing," he growled, watching the dim light wane before them. Alara, desperation etched on her face, clutched her tome tightly, whispering ancient incantations under her breath. Shadows crept closer, tendrils writhing hungrily towards the trio as Lua's staff cast anxious flickers on their determined faces. Eric raised his blade, resolve burning in his eyes. "We must combine our powers," he urged, locking gazes with Lua and Alara. Elara nodded, her voice rising as she chanted. Together, we can bolster this seal. As Eric's blade touched Lua's staff and Elara's tome, a surge of energy pulsed through them, resonating with the faltering barrier. Eric's heart raced as Lua's staff flickered ominously beside her, its runes pulsating with alarm. We must act swiftly, he urged, watching the seal wane before them. Elara, desperation in her eyes, flipped through her tome urgently, searching for a solution. Shadows crept closer, tendrils writhing hungrily towards the trio as Lua's staff cast anxious flickers on their faces. Eric raised his blade, determination burning in his gaze. Lua, bolster the seal with your runes, he commanded, pointing at the faltering barrier. Elara nodded, her voice rising as she chanted an incantation from her tome, its ancient pages turning rapidly under her unseen guidance. Eric's heart pounded as Lua's staff flickered ominously beside her, its runes pulsating with alarm. We must act swiftly, he urged, watching the seal wane before them. Elara, desperation in her eyes, flipped through her tome urgently, searching for a solution. Shadows crept closer, tendrils writhing hungrily towards the trio as Lua's staff cast anxious flickers on their faces. Eric raised his blade, determination burning in his gaze. Lua, bolster the seal with your runes, he commanded, pointing at the faltering barrier. Elara nodded, her voice rising as she chanted an incantation from her tome, its ancient pages turning rapidly under her unseen guidance. Alara's incantation reached its zenith as Lua reinforced the seal with intricate runes, matching those on Eric's blade. The pulsating barrier surged briefly before waning once more. "It's not enough," Lua whispered, fear etched deeply on her brow. Eric gritted his teeth, resolve burning in his eyes. "We need help. Now." As shadows encroached, tendrils writhing hungrily towards them, a distant howl echoed through the woods. As Lua's staff pulsed anxiously, Eric scanned their surroundings, desperation gnawing at him. "We need another solution," he growled, wiping sweat from his brow. Alara bit her lip, flipping frantically through her tome for any overlooked spell. Suddenly, she paused, her eyes widening with hope. "The banishment of shadows," she murmured, tracing a complex rune on the page. Before Eric could react, Lua gasped, her staff's light flickering wildly. "It's too late," she cried out, pointing behind them. Tendrils of shadow had crept silently around, cutting off any escape route. They were surrounded, their only sanctuary now the faltering seal before them. As Eric's heart raced, he realized the futility of their desperate struggle against the encroaching shadows. "We cannot hold it much longer," he admitted, glancing at Lua and Alara's exhausted faces. Suddenly, a faint melody echoed through the woods, growing louder as an unseen force began to push back against the shadows. Hope sparked in their eyes as the tendrils receded slightly, revealing a figure emerging from the darkness. A young woman with flowing silver hair and ethereal features stepped forward, her hands glowing with an otherworldly light. She hummed softly, her melody resonating with power as she approached them. "I am Lyra," she introduced herself, her voice like music. "I've been searching for this awakening. Together, we may contain it." Eric's heart pounded as Lua's staff flickered ominously beside her, its runes pulsating with alarm. "We must act swiftly," he urged, watching the seal wane before them. Alara, desperation in her eyes, flipped through her tome urgently, searching for a solution. Shadows crept closer, tendrils writhing hungrily towards the trio as Lua staffed anxious flickers on their faces. "Lua, bolster the seal with your runes," Eric commanded, pointing at the faltering barrier. Alara nodded, her voice rising as she chanted an incantation from her tome, its ancient pages turning rapidly under her unseen guidance. Yet, as their combined efforts surged through the barrier, it flickered briefly before dimming once more. "It's not enough," Lua whispered, fear etched deeply on her brow. Eric gritted his teeth, resolve burning in his eyes. "We need help, now." As shadows encroached, tendrils writhing hungrily towards them, a distant howl echoed through the woods. Eric's gaze locked onto the seal as Lua's staff flickered anxiously beside her, its runes pulsing with alarm. "It's losing strength," she whispered, fear etched deeply on her brow. Alara flipped through her tome urgently, searching for another solution to strengthen their containment. As Lua reinforced the seal with intricate runes, matching those on Eric's blade, Alara chanted an incantation from her ancient tome, its pages turning rapidly under her unseen guidance. As Lua's staff glowed brighter, and Alara's incantation reached its zenith, Eric felt an unseen force pushing back against their combined efforts. Muscles taut and breath ragged, they strained against this malevolent power, determined to contain the creature within the pulsating barrier before them. As Lua's staff flickered anxiously beside her, its runes pulsating with alarm, Eric scanned their surroundings desperately for any means of escape. Alara, her voice trembling, frantically flipped through her tome, searching for an overlooked spell to strengthen the crumbling seal. The shadows encroached hungrily, tendrils writhing mere inches from the barrier's edge. "We need another solution," Eric growled, clenching his fist around his blade's hilt. Suddenly, Alara gasped, her finger tracing an intricate rune on an ancient page. Eric's heart pounded as Lua's staff flickered ominously beside her, its runes pulsating with alarm. "We must act swiftly," he urged, watching the seal wane before them. Alara, desperation in her eyes, flipped through her tome urgently, searching for a solution. Shadows crept closer, tendrils writhing hungrily towards the trio as Lua's staff cast anxious flickers on their faces. Eric raised his blade, determination burning in his gaze. "Lua, bolster the seal with your runes," he commanded, pointing at the faltering barrier. Alara nodded, her voice rising as she chanted an incantation from her tome, its ancient pages turning rapidly under her unseen guidance. Yet, as their combined efforts surged through the barrier, it flickered briefly before dimming once more. "It's not enough," Lua whispered, fear etched deeply on her brow. Eric gritted his teeth, resolve burning in his eyes. "We need help. Now." As shadows encroached, tendrils writhing hungrily towards them, a distant howl echoed through the woods. As Lua's staff flickered ominously beside her, its runes pulsating with alarm, Eric watched the seal wane before them, desperation gnawing at him. "We must act swiftly," he urged, glancing at Lua and Elara's exhausted faces. Elara, desperation in her eyes, flipped through her tome urgently, searching for a solution. Shadows crept closer, tendrils writhing hungrily towards the trio as Lua's staff cast anxious flickers on their faces. Eric raised his blade, determination burning in his gaze. "Lua, bolster the seal with your runes," he commanded, pointing at the faltering barrier. Elara nodded, her voice rising as she chanted an incantation from her tome, its ancient pages turning rapidly under her unseen guidance. Yet, their combined efforts proved futile. The seal flickered briefly before dimming once more. "It's not enough," Lua whispered, fear etched deeply on her brow. Eric gritted his teeth, resolve burning in his eyes. "We need help, now." As shadows encroached, tendrils writhing hungrily towards them, a distant howl echoed through the woods, an ominous portend of an approaching force. As Lua's staff flickered anxiously beside her, its runes pulsating with alarm, Eric scanned their surroundings desperately for any means of escape. Alara, her voice trembling, frantically flipped through her tome, searching for an overlooked spell to strengthen the crumbling seal. The shadows encroached hungrily, tendrils writhing mere inches from the barrier's edge. "We need another solution," Eric growled, clenching his fist around his blade's hilt. Suddenly, Alara gasped, her finger tracing an intricate rune on an ancient page. "The banishment of shadows," she exclaimed, hope gleaming in her eyes. "It requires great power, but together..." Before she could finish, Lua cried out, pointing behind them. A massive tendril had wrapped around the failing seal, threatening to shatter it entirely. As Alara's fingers danced over the ancient tome, tracing the intricate rune for the banishment of shadows, Eric felt a glimmer of hope. Yet, as Lua's staff flickered anxiously beside her, casting eerie shadows on their determined faces, he knew time was running out. Suddenly, a deafening roar echoed through whispering woods, shaking the very ground beneath them. A colossal form burst forth from the darkness, its eyes burning with malice. The source of the awakening had arrived. Eric's heart pounded as he gripped his blade, the ancient rune pulsating on its pommel. Beside him, Lua's staff glowed weakly, its once brilliant light now flickering like a dying ember. Alara stood resolute, her tongue open to the banishment incantation, but fear lurked in her eyes. Suddenly, the ground trembled violently, and an earth-shattering roar echoed through whispering woods. The creature's towering form emerged from the darkness, its eyes burning with malevolent intent. Shadows danced around it, tendrils reaching out like twisted vines. As the creature loomed before them, Eric's grip tightened on his blade, its rune pulsing ominously. Lua's staff cast feeble rays against the encroaching darkness, her brow furrowed in concentration. Alara whispered the final words of the banishment incantation, hope flickering briefly in her eyes. With a deafening roar, the creature lunged forward, tendrils lashing out like whips. Eric stepped ahead, blades singing through the air as he parried the shadowy strikes. Lua's staff blazed brightly for an instant, slowing the creature's advance, but it was not enough. As Eric's blade clashed with the creature's tendrils, sparks flew like fiery embers, momentarily illuminating its grotesque form. Lua's staff flickered valiantly, casting feeble beams that seemed to enrage rather than deter their foe. Alara, her incantation faltering, clutched her tongue tightly, fear etched deeply on her face. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the clearing. "Stand down, abominable beast." A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in robes adorned with symbols matching those on Eric's blade. The creature hesitated, its burning gaze shifting towards the newcomer. "I am Eldred, keeper of the blades," the stranger declared, staff aglow with an intense light that dwarfed Lua's waning power. Eldred stepped forward, his staff blazing with ancient power as he challenged the creature's malevolent gaze. "I command you, servant of darkness," he declared, voice echoing through the clearing. "Release these lands from your shadowy grasp." Eric, Lua, and Alara exchanged wary glances, hope flickering anew amidst their fear. The creature snarled, tendrils lashing out viciously as it defied Eldred's command. Eric leaped into action, blade clashing against shadows while Lua summoned a feeble barrier to protect them. Alara, regaining her composure, began chanting another incantation to bolster their defenses. As Eldred's staff blazed fiercely, the creature recoiled, tendrils shrinking back into the darkness. "Your power is great, Keeper," Eric acknowledged, grateful for their unexpected ally. Eldred nodded solemnly, "But it wanes with each strike. We must combine our strength to vanquish this foe." Lua reinforced her staff's glow, lending support to Eldred's intense light. Alara, meanwhile, frantically flipped through her tome, seeking a spell potent enough to bind the creature. As she found the desired incantation, she began chanting, her voice weaving through the air like silk threads, strengthening their united front against the malevolent force. 3. Eric's heart raced as he watched Eldred's staff clash against the creature's tendrils, its intense light driving back the shadows momentarily. Beside him, Lua's staff glowed brighter under his influence, her eyes reflecting newfound determination. Alara, tongue aglow with ancient power, joined in their united front, chanting a spell to bind their foe. As Eldred's staff blazed fiercely at its center, Lua reinforced her own light, lending support to the Keeper's powerful incantation. Together, they drove back the creature, tendrils recoiling from their combined might. Yet, deep within its burning eyes, a malevolent intelligence stirred, undeterred by their united assault. As Eldred's staff blazed fiercely at its center, Lua reinforced her own light, lending support to the Keeper's powerful incantation. Together, they drove back the creature, tendrils recoiling from their combined might. Yet deep within its burning eyes, a malevolent intelligence stirred, undeterred by their united assault. Suddenly, the creature let out a deafening roar, tendrils lashing out viciously as it broke free from their grasp. Eldred stumbled back, staff flickering ominously, his strength waning. Eric leaped to his aid, blade clashing against shadows while Lua and Elara redoubled their efforts to reinforce the faltering barrier. As Eric, Lua, Elara, and Eldred fought valiantly against the monstrous creature, their united front began to falter. Sweat beaded on their brows, breaths ragged from exertion, and their once powerful incantations now strained under the relentless assault. The creature's malevolent intelligence seemed to anticipate each of their attacks, countering them with brutal efficiency. Eldred, his staff flickering ominously, called out to Lua, "Reinforce our barrier." As she hastened to comply, Eldred turned to Elara, "Strengthen your binding spell." Yet, despite their desperate efforts, the creature's tendrils snaked through their defenses, threatening to ensnare them one by one. Eric, blades still clashing against shadows, barked at Lua, "We need a new strategy." Just as he spoke, a sudden chill swept through Whispering Woods. The air grew heavy with an ancient power, and a faint, ethereal melody began to resonate around them. From the depths of the forest, mystical figures emerged, their eyes glowing with otherworldly light. As Eldred faltered, Eric stepped forward, "We need to regroup." He glanced at Lua, "Can you maintain the barrier?" She nodded, staff aglow as she reinforced their defenses. Elara, tome trembling in her grasp, whispered, "I'll find another spell." The creature snarled, tendrils writhing menacingly against their failing barrier. Suddenly, ethereal melody echoed through Whispering Woods, drawing everyone's gaze to its source, a group of mystical figures emerging from the shadows. Their eyes glowed with otherworldly light, staffs pulsating with ancient power. Eric, sensing an ally, called out, "Who are you?" "Sa." As Lua reinforced their barrier, Eldred turned to Elara. "Can you adapt your binding spell to target its heart?" She nodded, flipping frantically through her tome. Eric, still clashing with shadows, called out, "We need to distract it." Just then, the mystical figures approached, their leader greeting them with a nod. "I am Luminar, guardian of Whispering Woods' secrets. We've been summoned by the forest's ancient power to aid you." "Da." With newfound hope, Eric turned to Luminar. "We need your help to distract it." Nodding solemnly, the Guardian raised his arms, mystic energy pulsating around him as he began an intricate incantation. Shadows recoiled from the sudden surge of light, allowing our heroes a moment's respite. Alara, tome open before her, quickly adapted her binding spell to target the creature's heart. Her fingers danced across the pages, tracing runes that glowed briefly under her touch. She murmured the modified incantation, voice resonating with ancient power. Meanwhile, Lua reinforced their barrier, staff aglow with intense runic energy. Sweat beaded on her brow as she strained against the malevolent force pressing against their defenses. "Hurry," she gasped, fear etched in every line of her face. As Alara's spell reached its climax, Eric and Lua exchanged a nod, ready to strike at the heart of their foe. With a mighty roar, the creature lunged forward, smashing against Lua's barrier. It shuddered but held, buying them precious seconds. Eldred, sword drawn, joined Eric's side. Together, he growled, and they charged. Meanwhile, Luminar's companions fanned out, mystical energies weaving intricate patterns around them as they chanted in unison. Shadows recoiled from their radiant auras, momentarily easing pressure on Lua's barrier. As Eric and Eldred's blades bit deep into the creature's flesh, it let out an earth-shattering roar, thrashing wildly. Lua faltered, her barrier flickering under renewed onslaught. "I can't hold much longer," she cried out, fear etched in every word. Alara, tongue closed, began weaving a new spell, fingers dancing intricate patterns in the air. As Eric's blade bit deeper, he felt a surge of ancient power coursing through him. Eldred, matching his rhythm, grunted. "We've got this, brother." Lua's staff flickered dangerously, her voice strained as she fought to maintain the barrier. "I need more time," she gasped. Alara, tongue open, began chanting a new spell, eyes focused on the pulsating seal behind them. Eric, noticing Lua's struggle, called out, "Alara, we need that binding spell now." Alara, tongue aglow with ancient power, chanted the revised incantation, her voice resonating through the clearing. Meanwhile, Eldred, sword drawn, joined Eric in pressuring the creature, their blades gleaming under Luminar's companion's mystical lights. As Alara's spell reached its climax, she gestured towards Lua. "Now." Lua released her staff's energy, reinforcing their barrier just as the creature lunged. The barrier held, but Lua staggered back, exhausted. Eric and Eldred redoubled their efforts, blades driving deep into the beast's flesh. As Lua's staff finally dimmed, Eric, Alara, and Eldred stood panting, blades dripping with blood. The creature thrashed wildly, bound by Alara's spell but far from defeated. Suddenly, the ground trembled as something massive approached. Luminar turned to them. "Or aid comes." But it may not be enough. A colossal tree uprooted itself, towering above them, roots writhing like serpents. As Lua's staff finally dimmed and Alara closed her tongue, Eric lowered his blade, exhausted but triumphant. "That should hold. For now," he murmured, hope flickering in his eyes as they contemplated the possibility of true containment. Behind them, pulsating seal seemed to hum softly in response to his words, its dim light casting long shadows across sweat-streaked faces. Suddenly, Lua's staff flickered anxiously beside her, runes pulsing with alarm. "It's losing strength," she whispered, fear etched deeply on brow as she watched barrier wane before them. Eric's gaze locked onto seal, heart pounding with concern for shared predicament. Alara flipped through Tum urgently, searching for another solution to strengthen their containment. As Lua reinforced seal with intricate runes, matching those on Eric's blade, Alara chanted incantation from ancient Tum, its pages turning rapidly under her unseen guidance. Alara's fingers danced frantically across the ancient Tum, searching for any spell that could reinforce their waning barrier. Eric turned to Lua, concern etched on his face. "How much longer can you hold this?" Before she could respond, an earth-splitting crack echoed through the woods. The colossal tree had snapped in two, its massive trunk hurtling towards them. As Alara's incantation reached its crescendo, the pulsating seal glowed brighter, for a moment, before flickering ominously. Eric's heart sank as he realized their efforts were futile against this ancient evil. Suddenly, Lua cried out in pain, her staff shattering into splinters as the barrier collapsed completely, leaving them defenseless. The monstrous creature, free from its bonds, let out a triumphant roar and lunged towards them, jaws wide. As Lua's staff shattered, Alara threw herself between the creature and her allies, Tum held aloft like a shield. "Retreat!" she screamed, pages of ancient spells flipping frantically as she sought a means to hold back the beast. Eric and Eldred stood their ground, blades raised defiantly, but Lua stumbled backwards, her strength spent. As Alara's incantation faltered, the creature lunged forward, its malevolent aura intensifying. Eric and Eldred redoubled their efforts, blades clashing against unseen forces as they struggled to protect their allies. Lua, despite her exhaustion, managed to grasp a fallen shard of her staff, channeling what remained of her power into it. Retreat. Alara cried again, desperation etched on her face as she desperately tried to maintain the crumbling barrier. The creature's roar shook the chamber, its tendrils lashing out, seeking to snuff out their defiance. As Alara's spell faltered, Eric glanced at Lua, seeing her grasp a shard of her broken staff. "Lua, we need to buy time for Alara," he shouted, charging towards the creature with renewed vigor. Eldred followed suit, blades clashing against the dark tendrils that lashed out menacingly. Alara's voice trembled as she chanted another incantation, her tome's pages fluttering wildly. "This won't hold much longer. We must retreat," she cried, desperation etched on every line of her face. As Lua's staff shard flickered ominously, Eric realized their desperate struggle was waning. "We need another plan," he growled, parrying a tendril that snaked towards Alara. Eldred, grunting with effort, nodded grimly, his blade meeting Eric's in a clash of steel. Alara, panting, whispered an incantation under her breath, attempting to bolster their faltering barrier. "I've got something," she gasped, flipping frantically through her tome. "But it'll take time. And we don't have much left." As Lua's staff shard guttered out, casting them into near darkness, Alara's voice cracked. "Retreat now." Eric and Eldred exchanged a look, sheathing their blades as they backed away, eyes locked onto the seething mass before them. The creature seemed to pause, sensing their shift in strategy. As they retreated, Eric scooped Lua up in his arms, her breath shallow and weak. Alara led them through a hidden passage behind the crumbling chamber, her knowledge of ancient paths guiding their escape. The creature's ominous presence seemed to press against the very air, urging them to hasten their flight. Where are we going?" Eric panted, his muscles atching from the intense battle and sudden sprint. Alara glanced back at him, her eyes filled with urgency. "There's an ancient sanctuary deeper in Whispering Woods. If we can reach it, its enchanted barriers might offer us some respite." As they ventured deeper into Whispering Woods, the air grew colder and heavier, as if the very woods themselves held their breath. Alara's steps quickened, her urgency palpable as she guided them towards the sanctuary. Eric, still carrying Lua, felt a pang of worry. Her skin was pale, breath shallow. Suddenly, Alara halted, listening intently. "Hush," she whispered. "We're being followed." A distant rumble echoed through the woods, growing louder, more insistent. The ground trembled slightly under their feet. "That's not natural," Eldred murmured, his hand resting on his sword. "Quickly, we must hasten," Alara urged, breaking into a run. Eric followed suit, Lua's limp form jostling in his arms as they darted through the dense foliage. As Alara led them deeper into Whispering Woods, the sanctuary's promise of respite seemed distant. Eric, laboring under Lua's weight, felt her life force waning. Eldred, ever vigilant, whispered, "We need to rest." Alara bit her lip, considering their plight. "There's a hidden glade nearby. We can regroup there, but we must hurry." As Eric cradled Lua closer, her breaths growing fainter, Alara's urgent pace through Whispering Woods seemed to stretch into eternity. Eldred, panting beside them, warned, "We can't keep this up much longer." Just then, Alara spotted a faint glow ahead, the hidden glade. She hastened towards it, hope flickering in her eyes. Alara's urgency quickened as she led them deeper into whispering woods, her heart pounding with trepidation. Eric, straining under Lua's weight, felt her life force flicker weakly. Eldred, sweat dripping from his brow, cautioned, "Wu need to rest soon." As they reached the hidden glade, Alara breathed a sigh of relief. This should buy us some time. Exhausted from their desperate flight, Eric gently laid Lua down on a bed of soft moss in the secluded glade. Alara hurriedly checked her wounds, murmuring ancient healing incantations under her breath. Eldred stood guard at the edge of the clearing, eyes scanning the woods warily for any sign of pursuit. As Lua's breath stabilized and color returned to her cheeks, Eric turned to Alara. "What now?" he asked, hope flickering in his gaze.